Among the MVPs of the Wano Country arc, I place Zoro just behind Luffy, not only for cutting Kaidou or withstanding a blow from both Big Mom and Kaidou at the same time. I rank Zoro among the best in this war, mainly for defeating a monster like King. Sometimes people don't realize the strength King possesses. Kaidou only needed to feel a fraction of this Lunarian's power to decide that he would be his right-hand man in the crew, and that's why this fight is so remarkable. Zoro and King gave us one of the most well-animated and balanced fights, not only in Wano but also in the entire history of One Piece. And that's why I decided to make this video to tell you everything behind this mythical battle between Zoro and King. I'll show you what led to this fight, every detail of the battle, and what it represents for the battle in Onigashima as a whole. It all starts in Zoo. On the island, the samurai of Wano reveal what Kaidou of the 100 Beasts and Orochi are doing to their people. This is where we get the ninja, pirate, mink, samurai alliance. But of course, things wouldn't be easy, as in this battle we had very powerful enemies, like the supernovas Basil Hawkins and Scratchman Apu. We also had the Tobiropos, who were tasked with fighting Usopp, Nami, Frankie, Robin, and Jinbei. We had the two main fronts of battle, Kaidou and Big Mom, and of course, Kaidou's three calamities were also there, being Jack the Drought, Queen the Plague, and King the Conflagration. Zoro, upon arriving in Onigashima, was discovering a new power he didn't know he had the capacity to use. This power made people around him fall, which made Kaidou's pirates question if this power was the Haki of the Supreme King. He ended up going through some hardships, especially when Apu used his devil fruit powers to slow him down. But in the end, with Marco's help, he managed to reach the Skull Dome of Onigashima, where the most important battle of the night would begin. Alongside Kid, Killer, Law, and Luffy, they faced Kaidou and Big Mom at the same time. The supernovas realized that it was impossible to fight these two simultaneously, but before they could come up with a plan to separate them, Kaidou and Big Mom launched one of the most powerful attacks ever seen in the history of One Piece, which could certainly cause damage to all five of them at once. However, Zoro took the lead, tanking the attack and preventing his companions from being hit. Of course, the attack left him very exhausted, but he still had the strength to help knock Big Mom off the top of the castle. At that moment, Kid and Killer went down to fight her, and it was up to Zoro to try to deliver his final blow and end Kaidou's life in this last attack. Using an Asura technique, with pressure infused into his blades, he managed to cut Kaidou, who questioned if this attack was also Haki of the Supreme King. Despite this incredible feat, this attack only worsened things, because Zoro already had several broken bones, which left him unable to move. Luckily, Luffy decided he would fight Kaidou alone, while Law went down with Zoro. Upon arriving there, Zoro was completely bandaged by Sanji, who went to Chopper to try to heal him. At this point, King and Queen were giving a lot of trouble. Poor Marco was suffering alone against these two Yonko commanders, as Chopper was no longer able to continue fighting Queen. Seeing that things down there would be very difficult without someone of equal strength to help Marco in this battle, the Minks arrived to examine Zoro along with Chopper. The issue is, Zoro had dozens of fractures and broken bones. He literally had no condition to fight. That's when the Minks reveal their powerful medicine, capable of instantly healing anything. The problem is that this miraculous cure comes at a price. As soon as the effect wears off, the user will suffer twice the pain they were feeling. Of course, Zoro accepts, as it is better to suffer the consequences after the battle is already won. So he takes the medicine, and at the exact moment when Queen and King are about to strike Marco, Sanji kicks Queen while Zoro uses his Santoryu to attack King. Finally, it's time for the stars to take the stage. However, the two stars rise, saying that this is not enough to bring down Kaidou's two calamities. As the two start the fight, Sanji feels that his body is different since he used the Germa suit, while Zoro tells him not to interfere in this battle. To emphasize Zoro's order, King tries to catch Sanji off guard, but Zoro blocks the blow, saving his companion. But of course, Sanji wouldn't let that slide. Immediately after, Queen goes to attack Zoro, but Sanji retaliates, saving the swordsman. At this point, Sanji uses his fire-producing techniques, leaving Queen intrigued about the origin of these powers. King, distracted by Sanji's fire, is attacked by Zoro. The problem is that, in this clash of attacks, Zoro realizes that King's blade can become serrated with a single movement, which can be very useful for disarming him. Taking advantage of this, King prepares a punch to Zoro's face, which Zoro manages to block at the last second with the sword in his mouth. As he notices the real difficulty of this battle, Zoro reaffirms his desire to win, saying that he cannot lose under any circumstances. The two go for another clash, but Zoro is thrown far away, landing at Frankie's feet. Frankie even asks if he needs help, but of course, our swordsman says he can handle it alone. Queen starts shouting at King, saying that he is attacking randomly and very angrily. Even the beast pirates nearby feel that King is out of control. He is attacking without caring about who is around. The reason behind this rage is that Zoro managed to crack his mask. Zoro returns to the fight using his Santoryu, which collides with King's wings. The result of this collision is that Zoro is thrown with such force that he breaks through the wall, but he still managed to leave his mark, further damaging King's mask and revealing part of his face. With this, we see that King has white hair and dark skin. King, even more irritated, flies at Zoro while he is still being thrown and tries to push him off Onigashima. He almost succeeds, but before falling, Zoro uses the speed of his sword to create an impulse and launch himself back to the island. This makes Zoro very angry, as he says that if King wants to kill him, he should at least use a sword. Now the battle between these two will continue outside the castle. However, Zoro is surprised by a call from Sanji. Before they separated, Sanji placed a hidden Denden Mushi on Zoro in case he got lost somewhere. Zoro quickly asks what he wants, as he is interrupting. Sanji says they will win this fight, but after that, he asks the swordsman to kill him if he is no longer the same as before. Zoro doesn't understand the reason for this request, but seems calm when he says he will do it without any problem. And on top of that, he asks Sanji not to die before then, so he can do it himself. The call ends, and King begins to use the powers of his Pteranodon fruit. He pulls back his head and launches it at an absurd speed, saying that this was how beings of that species used to hunt. As he launches the technique, Zoro manages to dodge it by a hair, but the problem is that this attack is so fast that it resembles a laser beam. Zoro tries to counterattack with a long-range shot, but it has no effect. He begins to think of a way to attack King more effectively, as none of his strikes have caused the necessary damage to Kaidou's commander so far. Thus, he decides to use a Santoryu technique capable of producing a tornado. However, once again, it has no effect. With his wings, King can control himself in the air and prevent his opponent's attack from causing damage to him. The commander returns to fighting on the ground, engaging in a classic swordsman battle with Zoro. Seeing that nothing is working, Zoro tries to understand what King really is, so he can think of an attack that will be effective. Besides all this strength, effervescent flames are on King's back. Zoro even says he thought this was an ability of his Akuma no Mi, but concludes that it is not. Because of these unusual characteristics and because King hasn't bled so far, Zoro questions whether King is a giant or a fish man, as a normal human wouldn't be able to do these things and still come out unscathed from all these attacks. In other words, he concludes that King is of another race. While making these speculations, King manages to throw him far away, leaving him lying on the ground, almost defeated. But at that moment, something intriguing happens. Hiyori, Odin's daughter, is inside the castle and begins to play her shamisen. The sound emanating from this instrument causes the Enma sword to go out of control. It starts to rapidly drain Zoro's Haki, causing his arm to lose muscle over time. The reason for this is probably that the sword became euphoric upon hearing that sound, because before, this sword belonged to Hiyori, and it was used to hearing the sound produced by her instrument. Zoro becomes very irritated with this and starts to argue with the sword, saying that he did not give permission for it to activate its power. The swordsman manages to control Enma and goes for a direct attack to King's stomach. He even hits, but incredibly, the blow generates a giant explosion. As usual, King again comes out unscathed from the blow and the explosion. Zoro, however, almost suffers serious damage. Zoro uses one of his strongest single sword attacks, but again, it has no effect. This makes it clear to Zoro that King is on another level. Several strikes have been delivered, but none have had any effect so far. King starts to pull back his head to perform that attack again, and to make matters worse, Enma begins to drain Zoro's Haki once more. Taking advantage of the situation, King pulls back his head and attacks Zoro up close, grazing him and destroying the floor they are standing on, causing both to fall. Even while falling, Zoro tries to save his Sandai Kitetsu, which is slipping out of his reach. King becomes furious with Zoro, who is risking himself just to save a sword, and kicks him back to the island. When he returns to the island, he sees his other sword, Wado Ichimonji, and remembers that it is his oldest sword. He recalls that this sword belonged to Kuana, and also represents the promise they made when they were young, in which they said that one of them would become the best swordsman in the world. Additionally, he also has a memory from his childhood. He remembers the blacksmith Shimotsuki Kozaburo, an old man from his village, who gave him various pieces of advice. Putting together everything he learned in Wano, Zoro concludes that this same old man was a legendary blacksmith from the land of Wano, who was in Zoro's village in the East Blue. By combining everything he learned in Wano and his childhood with the blacksmith, Zoro discovers what Enma truly wants. It had actually been testing him all this time to see if he was truly worthy of wielding it. It wanted to see if Zoro was someone who would not falter in the face of danger. And Zoro, being up against someone as extraordinary as King, doubted for a few moments that he could defeat him. And as Rayleigh himself says, Haki is the act of not doubting oneself. That's when he completely surrenders to the sword, letting it take all the Haki at once. And thus, he realizes he must give his all with his Haki to wield the sword the same way Odin did in his time. With all this, Zoro, for the first time, consciously releases his Conqueror's Haki, infusing it into the sword, just as Kaidou and Luffy are doing at this very moment with their fists. Seeing that Zoro possesses such power, King asks if Zoro wants to become a king. Zoro says yes, as he owes it to his captain and his friend. In addition to all this, Zoro realized that when King extinguished the flames on his back to become faster, his defense became vulnerable. Waiting for the right moment, he strikes King with even more force, and this time, his attack is effective. He manages to shatter King's mask, revealing his face. Upon seeing this, the Beast Pirates state that the government offers a reward of 100 million berries to anyone who provides information about the Lunarian race. King is of that race. Long ago, the Lunarians were known as the gods of this world, mainly because of their extraordinary abilities. They lived above the Red Line, but were eventually exterminated, nearly reaching extinction, and King is probably one of the last remaining. Much more furious than before, King burns those members of the Beast Pirates and heads into the climax of the fight. Zoro, now with his Conqueror's Haki, acquires a new fighting style called King of Hell, capable of launching attacks with green flames coming from his sword. King manages to dodge, but this attack is enough for him to realize that things are getting even more difficult. This makes him remember his past, where it is revealed that the government used his body as a guinea pig for studies and tests. One day, Kaidou invaded the laboratory and saved King, inviting him to join his crew. From then on, he greatly admired Kaidou, believing that he would be the one to change the world someday. With the determination to take his captain to the top, King imbues his sword with a fire dragon and attacks Zoro. But the swordsman dodges, and King tries to disarm him as he did initially, but Zoro obviously doesn't fall for the same trick twice. King kicks Zoro, but the swordsman, who now understands how the Lunarians work, notices an opening and makes a cut on King's chest. The Calamity flies away and says it is impossible for a human like Zoro to defeat someone superior. He also says he will remember Zoro for being a brave swordsman, but Zoro says that he will leave his marks on King's body, and that he will remember them if he survives the attack. Then comes King's strongest technique, Umori Karyudon, a giant flaming dragon that charges towards the swordsman. A beautiful attack, formed by a giant dragon, heads towards Zoro, who manages to dodge with every step he takes on the rocks. As they get closer to each other, King launches a new dragon, and Zoro prepares his Santoryu again. He enters the dragon and comes out the other side, but with King cut, King loses his right wing, and Zoro returns to the island using the momentum from his attack to propel himself backward. Amid the defeat, King can only think of his captain. He is to Kaidou what Zoro is to Luffy. Both promised never to lose until their captain reached the top. Despite being two men who go to extremes to honor the words they gave to their captain, one of them would have to break their promise, and on this night, King was the one who couldn't lead his captain to victory. With Zoro saying he could even become the King of Hell, he defeats King in one of the best battles in the anime. I said at the beginning of the video that Zoro was the second best of the arc, only behind Luffy, right? Well, Zoro really demonstrated incredible feats in battle, making so many sacrifices as he did throughout his various battles and fighting against the strongest members of the Beast Pirates. This is something admirable that places him among the best. If you enjoyed recalling this epic fight between Zoro and King, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications to receive more One Piece videos.